4 terrifying true horror stories that happened in winter. Tell late night story. Winter, the season of silent, snow-covered landscapes, cozy nights by the fire, and festive celebrations. But beneath the surface of its peaceful beauty, winter also harbors something far more sinister. The long, dark nights stretch endlessly, roads become isolated under heavy snowfall, and the cold itself has a way of making people disappear without a trace. When the world is buried under ice and silence, who's to say what lurks just beyond your vision, hidden in the storm? In these 4 terrifying true stories, winter becomes the perfect setting for horror, where strangers knock in the dead of night, footprints appear where no one should be, and the bitter cold brings more than just frostbite. These are not just chilling tales, they are real events that prove winter isn't just cold, it can be deadly. So, as the wind howls outside your window, ask yourself, are you truly alone? Story 1. The Man in the Red Shirt. A true winter horror story. I will never forget that night. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones, the snow thick and suffocating, muffling every sound. My wife had gone to bed early, leaving me alone in the dim light of the living room, half watching a football game while the wind whistled through the trees outside. It was the kind of night where nothing should have been moving, too cold, too quiet, too dead. And yet, something was out there. At first I thought it was my imagination, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow against the snow. But when I turned to the window, I saw him. A man standing by the pine tree in my backyard, completely still. He wasn't wearing a coat or a hat, just a short-sleeved red shirt, his arms bare against the freezing wind. That alone was unsettling enough. But then I noticed something even more disturbing. He wasn't breathing. In weather like this, every breath should have been visible, plumes of fog curling in the air, proof of life against the bitter cold. But there was nothing. No mist, no movement, just him, staring directly at me, his face pale, his eyes dark and bottomless. I stepped closer to the window, my pulse quickening. The glass was cold against my fingertips as I leaned in for a better look. That's when I felt it. The air around me seemed to thicken, pressing in like something unseen was watching, waiting. My chest tightened with a deep, primal fear. Every instinct told me not to open the door. But I did. The wind howled as soon as I cracked it open, a sharp, icy gust cutting through me like a blade. The man did not react. He stood there, his posture unnaturally stiff, his head tilted just slightly, like he was listening. "Hey!" I called out, my voice swallowed by the wind. "Who are you? Do you need help?" Nothing, not even a twitch of recognition. He simply stood there, his eyes locked onto mine. Then suddenly he moved. Not like a normal person. His head snapped to the side in an unnaturally sharp motion, and before I could react, he turned and slipped behind the tree, gone in an instant. I hesitated, my fingers tightening on the doorframe. A sane man would have locked up and walked away. But something inside me, a mix of curiosity and sheer disbelief, pushed me forward. I stepped out into the yard, my breath fogging up in the air. I walked around the tree. There was no one there, no footprints in the snow, no sign that anyone had ever stood there at all. My stomach twisted into knots. I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me, my hands trembling. Maybe I was just seeing things. Maybe the wind had distorted my vision, the shadows playing tricks on me. I forced myself to sit back down, tried to focus on the game, but then a noise from upstairs, a soft, deliberate creak, like a footstep on the wooden floor. My heart stopped. My wife was asleep. No one else should have been in the house. Slowly, I stood up, every nerve in my body on edge. I moved toward the staircase, my pulse hammering in my ears. As I reached the top step, I turned to look out the window, and my stomach dropped. He was there, standing in my driveway now, closer than before. My breath caught in my throat. How? I had just seen him in the backyard. There was no way he could have circled around that fast. But there he was, standing under the dim glow of the street lamp, his head tilted at that same unnatural angle. And then he started walking toward my front door. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself as I rushed to the door, making sure it was locked. My fingers trembled as I gripped the handle, waiting, listening. The footsteps stopped. Then, the door handle turned. I choked on my breath. The metal rattled under his grip, a slow, methodical testing of the lock. He wasn't banging or trying to force his way in. It was worse than that. He was patient, calm, as if he knew I was right there on the other side. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. My whole body screamed, "Do not open it. Do not look outside." And then it stopped. I stood there for what felt like hours before I finally worked up the courage to peek through the peephole. He was gone. The driveway was empty. The street was deserted, the only movement coming from the snowflakes drifting under the glow of the streetlight. And yet, something still felt wrong. I waited until morning before I dared to check outside. There were no footprints leading away from my house, no marks in the snow where he had stood. But on the glass of my front window, there was a single handprint, a wet, red handprint. I tried to tell myself it was just condensation, some trick of the light, but deep down, I knew better. I never saw him again after that. At least I don't think I did. But sometimes in the dead of winter, when the air is still and the snow blankets the ground, I get the feeling I'm being watched. And once, just once, I checked the footage from my security camera. He was there, standing at the edge of my yard, not moving, not leaving, just watching. I never checked the cameras again. But maybe you should, right now. Would you dare look outside your window on a freezing night? If you knew something was watching you, do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 2. The Strange Encounter on the Lonely Winter Road. I was 20 years old when it happened. My younger brother, only 15, and I were making our way through the desolate, snow-covered expanse of northern British Columbia, a place where the cold gnaws at your bones and silence stretches for miles, broken only by the howling wind. It was a brutal winter, the kind that made the world feel like it had been frozen in time. We had been driving for hours through Pine Pass, a remote highway where civilization felt like nothing more than a distant memory. No towns, no gas stations, not even the occasional cabin to remind us that people still existed in this part of the world. Just miles of towering, snow-laden trees lining the road, their skeletal branches reaching toward the sky like something out of a nightmare. The only thing cutting through the darkness was the dim glow of my headlights reflecting off the icy pavement. Fatigue weighed heavy on me, my hands, stiff from gripping the wheel, ached, and my eyes burned with exhaustion. The road stretched endlessly before us, a winding ribbon of isolation. When I spotted a roadside pull-off, nothing more than a patch of cleared snow beside the road, I made the decision to stop. Just a short rest, I told myself, just enough to close my eyes for a moment. My brother stirred in the passenger seat, half asleep. "We'll be fine," I mumbled, more to myself than to him, as I turned off the ignition. The silence that followed was suffocating. No cars, no movement, just the wind howling through the trees, whispering secrets only it could understand. I tilted my seat back, letting the cold seep into my body, lulling me into a half-conscious state. The world outside blurred into nothingness, but then I woke up, not from a dream, not because I had rested enough, but because something was wrong. It was that feeling, primal, instinctive, a deep, guttural sense of unease that slithered up my spine like ice water. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't explain it, but I knew we weren't alone. The air inside the car felt heavier, charged with an invisible tension. My pulse pounded in my ears as I turned my head slowly toward the driver's side window. And that's when I saw them. 4, maybe 5, figures standing just outside the car, shrouded in darkness. Their faces, I couldn't see them, just the outlines of their bodies, motionless, pressed against the howling storm. They weren't moving, they weren't knocking, just standing there, watching, waiting. And then all at once, the car handles jerked, every single one of them, at the same time. A chorus of metallic clicks rang through the car as unseen hands yanked at the doors with synchronized force, rattling the frame. It was calculated, like they had rehearsed this 1,000 times before. My breath came in short gasps as I fumbled for the keys, my fingers numb with fear. My brother shot upright, groggy at first, until he heard the sound. His eyes, still fogged with sleep, locked onto the figures outside. And then, like a switch had flipped, his face drained of color. "Go," he whispered. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my foot against the gas pedal. The engine roared to life, tires spinning wildly on the ice for a terrifying second before catching traction. The car jolted forward, the sudden motion sending a spray of snow behind us. I didn't care if I hit them. I didn't care about anything except getting away. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of them as the taillights illuminated the storm. They didn't flinch. They didn't run after us. They simply watched, their silhouettes unnaturally still, their heads tilting in unison as the car sped away. I drove. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. My brother sat rigid beside me, his fingers digging into the seatbelt. We drove through the darkness, through the emptiness, through the storm, until the first glimmer of city lights bled into the horizon. Only then did I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. We made it to our aunt's house just before dawn. The moment we pulled into the driveway, I cut the engine and locked the doors, even though we were safe now. I think deep down, some part of me wasn't convinced we were safe. Neither of us spoke about it. Not that night, not the next day, not even years later. It was as if putting it into words would somehow make it real again, like speaking about it would invite them back. But the thing is, I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and what haunts me most isn't the fact that they were there. It's the fact that they knew we were there. They were waiting, and I can't shake the feeling that if I hadn't woken up when I did, they would have gotten in. What would have happened then? Tell me. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, certain that something was watching you? What if, just for a second, you weren't wrong? Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC The Place of the Brave and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 3. The Man Who Pulled My Sled into the Woods. It was the kind of winter day where the air was sharp enough to sting your cheeks, the sky heavy and gray, hanging low as if pressing down on the world. The late 1990s had their fair share of brutal winters, but for me, that particular afternoon stands out in my memory for an entirely different reason. I was 8 years old, bundled up in layers that felt suffocating, standing at the top of the steepest sledding hill in our town with my 12-year-old sister, Anna. The hill was alive with children's laughter, the sound of sleds scraping over packed snow, and the occasional shriek of delight as someone tumbled into a fluffy white bank. But I wanted something quieter, a place where I could sled without bumping into others. That's when I noticed a narrow, untouched path leading into the woods just off to the side. It seemed perfect. The snow was pristine, the trees silent witnesses to my small adventure. At first it was exhilarating, racing down the slope, feeling the crisp wind whip against my face, the world a blur of white and dark tree trunks. I would drag my sled back up and go again, each time gaining more confidence. It wasn't until my third or fourth run that I saw him. At first I barely registered his presence, a man standing just at the edge of the trees, motionless, as if he had always been there. He was out of place. Unlike the other adults on the hill, he wore no bright winter coat, no thick boots, no gloves. His clothes were old, dark, and tattered, blending too well with the shadows of the trees. His skin had a bluish tint, as if the cold had seeped into his very being, yet he didn't shiver. He didn't even seem to breathe. He just stood there, watching. A prickle of unease crept up my spine, but I told myself he was probably just a strange old man, maybe someone's grandfather, maybe he was lost. But before I could think too much about it, he moved. Without a word, without hesitation, he reached down, grabbed the rope of my sled, and turned toward the woods, pulling it behind him. My breath hitched. For a moment, I just stared, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. "Hey, that's mine," I called out, my voice uncertain. The man didn't stop. He didn't even look at me. He just kept walking, the sled gliding smoothly behind him, its runners leaving a thin, trembling line in the snow. Something about the way he moved made my skin crawl. It wasn't natural. His footsteps barely made a sound. He wasn't dragging the sled with effort, he was pulling it as if it weighed nothing at all. The further he went, the deeper the shadows around him seemed to stretch, swallowing him bit by bit. A cold fear gripped me. "Mister, that's my sled!" I shouted louder this time. Still, he ignored me. The sled was already halfway into the trees. I could barely see his face, but something in me knew I didn't want to. That was when my body finally listened to what my instincts had been screaming all along. Run. I turned and bolted, my boots slipping on the icy ground, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it over the distant shouts of sledding children. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The fear was primal, overwhelming. I wasn't just running from a man. I was running from something I should not have seen. By the time I reached the hill, I was breathless, shaking. I nearly crashed into my sister, who grabbed my arms, startled by my expression. "What happened?" she demanded, but I could barely get the words out. Between ragged breaths, I told her everything about the man, about how he had taken my sled, how he hadn't said a single word, hadn't even acknowledged my existence. Anna frowned, skeptical but concerned. "Are you sure it wasn't just some weird old guy?" she asked, but when she saw the way my hands were trembling, her expression darkened. We walked back to the edge of the woods together, cautious, hesitant, and there it was, my sled, sitting in the snow, untouched. The rope coiled neatly on top, as if it had never been dragged away at all. But the man was gone. The fresh snowfall made everything eerily still, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. No footprints, no disturbed snow, just the sled, exactly where I had left it, except I knew it hadn't been there. Anna picked it up and handed it to me. "See, maybe you imagined it," she said, trying to sound reassuring, but I could tell she wasn't convinced either. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, standing at the tree line, his hands hanging stiffly at his sides, his face obscured by shadow. I remembered the way the cold didn't seem to touch him, The way he moved, soundless and unnatural. For years, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it really was just some strange old man. Maybe I had overreacted, but deep down, I knew better. There was something wrong about him, something that wasn't human. And sometimes, even now, when I'm outside on a winter night, I swear I can feel it again, that unnatural stillness, that creeping dread. And I wonder, what would have happened if I had followed him? Have you ever felt something watching you from the trees, just out of sight? Something that didn't quite belong. Something that maybe, just maybe, was waiting for you to step off the path and follow? Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 4, Don't Open the Door, a winter horror story. That winter, the cold was more than just bone-chilling. It carried a weight, a silence that felt unnatural, as if the world had stopped moving. I lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of town, where the wind howled through the empty fields, creating eerie, mournful wails that echoed through the night. That night, the snow had piled high, covering the road in an endless sheet of white. I sat in my armchair near the fireplace, wrapped in a thick blanket, watching the flames flicker and dance. The warmth was comforting, a stark contrast to the freezing storm outside. My eyelids grew heavy, and for a moment I let myself relax, until a sound jolted me back to reality. Thump, thump, thump. A knock at the door, slow, steady, not urgent, but deliberate. My breath hitched. Who would be out in this weather, at this hour? I hesitated, then got up, my bare feet pressing against the cold wooden floor. Peering through the window, I saw a man standing outside. He was shivering violently, wearing only a thin, wet shirt, clinging to his body as if he had walked through a blizzard. His skin was deathly pale, his lips nearly blue. His breath formed thick clouds in the freezing air. But when he looked up, something was off. His eyes were hollow, dark, void of any warmth or desperation. Every instinct in my body screamed, "Don't open the door." But the sight of him, hunched over in the freezing storm, made my stomach churn with guilt. He could die out there. I hesitated for a second longer before reaching for the lock and pulling the door open. That was my mistake. He stepped inside and immediately I felt it. The room didn't warm up, it got colder. I shut the door quickly, but something about the air in the house had changed. It felt heavier. I turned to speak, but before I could say anything, I heard it, the sound of the deadbolt clicking into place. My body stiffened. I hadn't locked the door. I turned slowly. He was standing just a few feet away, no longer shivering, no longer hunched over. His posture was straight, his breathing steady, his gaze scanning the room as if surveying territory he had just claimed. A suffocating sense of dread gripped my chest, and then my eyes caught something, no footprints. Outside, the snow had been deep, freshly fallen. When he stepped in, there should have been melted snow, wet footprints trailing from the doorway, but there was nothing. He hadn't come from outside. I felt my breath hitch, my muscles locking in place, as an overwhelming sense of wrongness crashed over me. Run. But before I could move, I felt it, a cold breath against the back of my neck. His hand clamped down on my shoulder, ice cold, numbing, not human. And then, in a voice that was just a whisper, soft, amused, and entirely devoid of warmth, he spoke. "Why did you open the door?" Something inside me snapped. I bolted, lunging for the kitchen where the knives were. But before I could reach them, another hand, not his, grabbed my wrist. I wasn't alone in that room anymore. I screamed, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, my entire body ached. But I wasn't in my house anymore. Outside the window, a vast, snow-covered forest stretched endlessly into the distance. No town, no streetlights, just a cabin, old, unfamiliar, and open. And standing in the doorway, a man, no coat, no footprints. He looked up at me, and this time I knew for certain he was never human. So tell me, what would you do if a stranger knocked on your door in the dead of winter? Would you open it? Or have you already opened it and just don't remember? Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DDC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us.